I wanted to ask, and any of you are welcome to answer, under this current administration, how has OMB Director Vogt approached the legal requirements of our budget process, and how is it different from maybe previous administrations, even under the first Trump administration?
Well, yeah, obviously, they've been late in submitting budgets to the Congress, but again, as I said earlier, they're not the central player in the appropriations process. The chief executive is there to tell us how much he thinks he's going to need to faithfully execute the laws, to run the government. It's up to us to tell him how much we are willing to appropriate to him. The Congress appropriates but cannot spend. The president spends but cannot appropriate. That separation of powers is central to concept of good governance going back to Magna Carta. We need to focus on our responsibility to appropriate, and that's where we have an impediment that I think we can remove.
What happens when Congress and the White House disagree over who controls America's purse strings? Today's hearing tackled one of the most important and often overlooked issues in Washington, the federal budget process. Lawmakers questioned experts about delayed presidential budgets, the constitutional separation of powers, continuing resolutions, and whether Congress should change the rules to prevent costly government shutdowns. As the debate unfolded, members sparred over whether the current system encourages delay instead of action and whether forcing Congress to stay in Washington until appropriations are complete could finally break the cycle.
Yeah, I would just say, obviously, Russ Vought was also in the first Trump administration as well as the second. It's hard for me to be able to say day-to-day operations there because I'm not in day-to-day operations, but clearly the first year, very late in getting the budget over, which is typical for a president when they actually come in the first year. I think President Biden was as well on that, just because you're just getting your staff hired and trying to be able to get going. Also late years, already been mentioned by Chairman Cole. It is important to be able to get those numbers, but as Representative McClintock mentioned as well, those numbers are the requests from the president and the president's budget. In the 1974 Budget Act, they're supposed to be in on time, but this body actually determines, House and Senate, determines what's going to actually come out legislatively. It has to originate in the House. So literally this committee is the one who actually kicks it off first.
I don't know if Director Young, if you want to offer any input, even if differences.
Is it proper to comment on your own your own operations? Look, I mentioned this earlier, and I think it's true. I'm a OMB director. You've had members of Congress like Leon Panetta, who is the budget chair. So saw it from a member perspective, very different. I think having a staff director of the Appropriations Committee, even from a member who had been chair of budget, go. I think what that gave me was a perspective of, I knew what you needed. I knew your districts. Every government program, I go, whose district is that? So I had 15 years of that baked in. There was no way, as OMB director, I wouldn't consider how that impacted your constituents. I'm from South Louisiana. I don't do red and blue, and certainly not in a job like OMB. While I work for a Democratic president, I work for Democratic members. I believed I approached that job responsibility to make sure we are answering the mail for our constituents. I think a disaster response. It does not matter who represents them in the Senate and who represents them in the House. If there is a need, and thankfully I worked for a president who spent a long time in the Senate, and I did not have to convince him that was the right way to approach the job. So you got someone who was predisposed, I think, to not bypass this system.
Yeah, thank you so much, and sorry to rush you all. I just wanted to ask one more question. Speaking about local districts, there's always a concern that these automatic types of procedures or process would freeze out benefits to local districts. For example, under an automatic CR, no new community project funding, including local infrastructure and public safety projects, would be able to be enacted into law. Is that correct?
That is correct. If I can just make one comment on that, we're hopefully going to get a continuing resolution. That's not our best case scenario, but that's better than the worst case scenario of a shutdown. coming up. So that will start September the 1st. That kicks it all the way into November, let's say, before we actually get appropriations done. What I'm recommending is, instead of having a 2-month CR, it'd be 2 week, and we have to get all the work done at that point, and we all have to be here. At this point, we're punting all this and we're saying we'll deal with this in November. That's very different than you don't leave until it's done. So I totally agree that's how a CR works, but the goal of this is to not have a shutdown. Second best to having appropriations is having at least the government still operating, but we're all still here while we have to get this resolved. So hopefully CRs will be much shorter in the days ahead.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that that 2 weeks could keep getting extended under the bill.
It could if you want to stay here forever with Chairman Cole and be able to be here week after week after week with all of our colleagues here. By the way, Chairman Cole's a great guy to hang out with, but it's just, we all want to be able to get home and see our families and do other responsibilities. If we're in a position where we have to legally stay here and you can't move to
Don't forget to like, comment, and hit the subscribers button for more political and controversial showdowns.